Hi, everyone. My name is David Macklin. I am a family doctor. I have been practicing obesity medicine as a medical director of multidisciplinary teams in obesity treatment since 2003. I come to you today also as a co-author of the Canadian 2020 Clinical Practice Guidelines for the Treatment of Obesity, a co-author of the Psychology and Behavioral chapter. Obesity medicine has three pillars of treatment: behavioral therapy, medication, and surgery. I understand that most people know what medication and surgery are, but very few understand what behavioral therapy is. And so, if that's something which you're interested in learning about, you're in the right place. Today, the module we will cover is part of our 8-module knowledge translation of the behavioral chapter. And the chapter is the 6th, or module is the 6th, called the Restraint module. Today, the objectives will be as follows. First, over about 6 minutes, we will discuss what is cognitive restraint and why is it such a critical skill in obesity management, considered to be a central behavioral attribute of those who lose weight and keep it off. And then for about 5 minutes, we will close by learning how to help your patients develop the skill of cognitive restraint by using the now familiar ALCI method: ask, listen, summarize, invite, and inform, so that you have practical and easy solutions to address cognitive restraint in your clinical practice. Let's get started. Today, why is this a critical module? It's critical, in the words of James Hill and Rena Wing, really the grandparents of behavioral therapy and obesity medicine. They described that in this 2007 paper from the Journal of Obesity, that specifically dietary restraint, the cognitive control of food intake, seems to be the key behavioral attribute of people who are successful at losing weight and keeping it off. Here they found that successful dieters have increased neural activity in cortical areas involved in the control of behavior, otherwise known as the frontal cortex, otherwise known as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So what is it about this frontal cortex, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, to be more specific, that it is the site of this key behavioral attribute of those who lose weight and keep it off? And so you'll remember from a previous module discussion that there are 3 layers to the human appetite system where our weight is regulated. 2 of them are in the subconscious recesses, so neural circuitry that you and I don't have, our patients don't have access to, the homeostatic and motivational. Motivational will also be called hedonic or reward system. And then finally, though, the executive system, the higher level, the executive system where behavioral therapy takes place. The behavioral therapy directed at the executive system, one of the key components today that we're talking about is the development of the skill of restraint. Restraint over the significant biological drive to calories, which we call wanting, which was the subject of a previous module. Make sure, if you haven't seen the wanting module, that you watch it. Of course, medication and surgery, that allows access to the lower parts of our human appetite system, the parts that we and our patients don't have access to. So we learned from this really nice Canadian content, the prefrontal cortex and obesity, a health neuroscience perspective. Here, Cassandra Lowe and Amy Reichelt describe that the prefrontal cortex is and its function is a critical factor of an individual's vulnerability to obesity because of genetically conferred and developmental differences that result in variability at capacity, at activating and accessing the prefrontal cortex and practicing restraint-like behaviors. Individual differences in the PFC may predispose an individual to obesity via individual differences in dietary self-regulatory abilities. Where I will also point you to is to Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a novel which describes in a science summary way 2 human cognition systems, 2 modes of thinking that are the foundation of modern psychology. We understand that humans, as well described in this book, have 2 thinking systems. The system 1 thinking is very fast and intuitive, non-deliberative. And system 2 is very slow and tedious and deliberate. And we'll, as we talk about restraint skill, talk about these 2 types of system in the context of a autopilot and a sleepy executive, because system 2 is not a preferred way of thinking. And we can think of system 2 as a tired part of our thinking system that is really reticent to be used, but only if it has to be. And restraint skill is really about activating system 2. The automatic thoughts, system 1 thoughts, autopilot thoughts that individuals will experience in moments of wanting are as follows. Here's the concept. Individuals are struck by wanting through associative learning that's taken place at earlier stages of their life. In a moment of wanting, an individual will be faced with automatic system 1 autopilot thoughts. And the nature of these, or characteristic of these thoughts, are as follows. 1, they're immediately following a moment of wanting. 2, they're automatic. They're not controllable. They're going to happen anyway. And 3, they may sound quite persuasive. They're there to convince or to give reason and logic as to why someone should go ahead with a behavior, in this case, an eating behavior. And in fact, they're often irrational and untrue and in the opposite direction of truth. Here you see the sleepy executive as a wave of wanting is arriving. And in that moment, if the executive is sleepy, there's an autopilot in the top right that starts giving reasons and automatic cognitions and automatic thoughts as to why the individual should make this decision. And then, of course, if the executive is awake and not sleepy, and this is the outcome of restraint skill development, that in a moment of wanting, the executive is awake and may themselves make slow, tedious, deliberate thoughts and decisions around food that are more in the direction of the values of the patient. And so what does this all mean clinically? How will this change your practice tomorrow? Here, the restraint module describes, again, as all modules, an ask, listen, summarize, and inform, invite format. So we might listen and hear a patient describe that in moments of decision around food, they'll have thoughts like, I think I can have this now, and I thought, later I'll make up for it and I'll eat less, or I thought, I have room for this and it's within my calorie target, or, I'll just go and see what there is, or I'll just have a small amount of this, or, I think I'm not losing weight anyway, so I may as well, or, I think that's such a hard day that I deserve this. It's not like I'm eating donuts or ice cream here. It's kind of healthy food. It's not junk food, so it should be fine. It would be really rude not to eat, and onwards and onwards. And all these thoughts you might hear a patient describe as associated with food decisions that they're making. And of course, the next stage is to summarize. And so what you are telling me is that in these moments, you hear thoughts or the descriptions that you're providing, or that you're thinking, I'll just have this now and I'll make up for it later. Or, I checked and I have room in my calorie target. Or you're saying that you just want to go and see what there was and thought, I'll just have a small amount of this. Or you were thinking that, well, you're not losing weight anyway, so what difference does it make? And LMNOP, is that correct? Again, we've summarized so the patient has a sense that they have been heard. We have listened to them and we understand what they're describing. Of course, then the last stage, the inform invite, we scratch our heads and we invite the patients to consider, would you consider that in these moments, in these key moments we've described previously as moments of wanting, in moments of wanting, automatic thoughts will come that will give reason and justification as to why you should turn to food. And that identifying and modifying these thoughts that come automatically is a key and central skill in weight management. The central skill we see associated with those who lose weight and keep it off. And so I'm wondering if you would consider that your work would be to identify and recognize these thoughts. Maybe you can hear them in the moments that they happen. And then the work would be in an acceptance behavioral therapy perspective to consider that these are automatic thoughts and they're now programmed in and they're a normal part of human cognitions and not your fault. And they don't represent a flaw in character. This is just how the system works. And more work would be from a cognitive behavioral therapy perspective to, even once you've identified and recognize these thoughts, would be to even challenge and change your thinking, because changes in thinking are the key predictor of sustained behavior change. In fact, that's one of the definitions of behavior change that is sustained, is that an individual under these sets of circumstances used to think one way and then behave a certain way based on those thoughts. And now the same person in the same circumstances thinks differently. and therefore behaves differently. And therefore the changes in thinking are the key central behavioral change. And that results in adherence or sustained change in the behaviors of eating that results in sustained weight management. That's why it's such a key central skill to work on with patients. We can provide examples, and in our exercises or in our workings and listening and summarizing and then inviting stages with our patient, we can provide them with a list here of 13, let's call them themes of what the automatic system one autopilot cognitions might sound like in a weight management consultation, from credit card to deserve, earned, to gateway, to resignation, on track, off track, sociocultural norms, the rebel, balancing calories, the straw man argument, utilitarian, novel, and hedonist. Any one of these you might tune your ear to hear as patients are describing their eating behaviors and invite them to consider that these are automatic thoughts that they're experiencing. Of course, we'll always offer a script for you for your clinical encounters to start practicing with and over time develop your own words. And so I'm wondering if you would consider then this as a key next skill for you to develop in helping patients who are living with obesity manage obesity by helping them recognize this key central skill called restraint, which is quite literally the skill which we would attribute to those who are most likely to succeed long-term in managing their weight. The key behavioral attribute, as Rena Wing and James Hill describe, and these become the methods of supporting that skill development. Good luck and thank you for listening.